100,000. Iran's president has been reassuring people the crisis will end soon and that the health system is ready to handle the strain of the outbreak. The US president signed a $2.2 trillion aid package to help people and businesses cope with the effects of the pandemic. America does have the highest number of cases worldwide, with more than 100,000 people infected. Interestingly, China's begun easing its restrictions, though, on the 11 million people in Wuhan, where the outbreak was first reported back in December. People are now allowed to enter the city that's been under lockdown for more than 2 months.
First of all, it makes me very happy to see my family. Like my mother said, we wanted to hug, but now is a special period, so we can't hug or make any actions like these. Although the epidemic situation in China has taken a turn for the better, it has not been completely destroyed from the root.
Police in South Africa have been struggling to enforce a 21-day nationwide lockdown, which came into force Friday midnight. People are only allowed out of their homes to buy groceries or for health emergencies, but large crowds have been gathering in the poorer townships where social distancing is almost impossible because of the cramped living conditions. Some other news for you. Voters in Guinea have overwhelmingly backed a new constitution, which paves the way for President Alpha Condé to stay in power for another 12 years. Opposition leaders boycotted Sudan's referendum that was delayed after observers raised concerns about the impartiality. The referendum led to months of violent protests and the killing of at least 32 people on polling day. And dozens of people have been killed in fighting between rival forces near the Libyan city of Sirte. The internationally recognized Government of National Accord says at least 40 fighters loyal to the warlord Khalifa Haftar and 23 of its own soldiers have died. The violence resumed this week after a recent lull. There you go. You're up to date with the headlines on Al Jazeera. Studio B, unscripted from London, is next.
Why are journalists under attack? Because democracy is under attack.
I realized I was working for something that was evil, and I had been a part of actually creating it.
When Mark Zuckerberg essentially said that it is okay for politicians to lie, that spells doom. My name is Maria Ressa, and I'm a journalist and author.
The message that the government is sending is very clear. Be silent or you're next.
I've received thousands of death threats online.
I'm Christopher Wiley. I'm a data scientist, but most people know me as the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. Facebook knew about Cambridge Analytica's scheme since 2015. Before the story broke, Facebook threatened to sue The Guardian and then banned me for whistleblowing. I revealed how our data is being manipulated for political gain without our consent.
Since Rappler started reporting on President Duterte's deadly drug war, I've been repeatedly charged and arrested.
It makes you feel vulnerable. But I think that's the point, right?
I'm inspired by how Maria continues to stand up for the truth in the face of real danger.
Chris's revelations led to the largest data crime investigation in history.
If we allow cheating in our democratic process, and we allow this amount, what about next time? What about the time after that?
We know firsthand what happens when social media is weaponized.
And the danger it now poses to our democracies around the world.
This is an existential moment.
And it's time for us all to act.
It is so good to talk to you. You figured out, and then you created a system. You taught yourself how to code. You learned the data. And then you built this whole system that was very efficient at modifying behavior. And then you decided to take it down. When did you decide it was wrong?
When I first joined the company that later became Cambridge Analytica, SCL Group, I joined a company that at the time was working on projects that were geared towards counter-extremism and counter-radicalization, looking at how extremism spreads online. And we got discovered by a guy by the name of Steve Bannon, who, long story short, got a billionaire to acquire the company. And what I saw was that I had worked on a system that got essentially inverted to radicalize young men in the United States. And that, witnessing the inception of an insurgency, the alt-right campaign. And so when I started seeing videos of people in focus groups who were so angry with things that were frankly untrue, I realized I was working for something that was evil. And I had, been a part of actually creating it. And I couldn't keep doing that.
It's interesting when you said you were looking at it for counter-radicalization at first, right? So
Yeah.
I came to it because I was looking at how social network analysis spread the ideology of terrorism.
Yeah.
And we created Rappler because if you can convince people to blow themselves up with this radical ideology, why couldn't
You
we
have something
use
powerful.
it for good,
Yeah.
right? That's why we created Rappler. But then when you started seeing the negative parts, it's hard to pull yourself out. And to be a whistleblower, what gave you the courage to do that?
Yeah, I think, at least for me, growing up, kind of as an outsider. I was partly in a wheelchair when I was growing up because of an invisible disability. And then lob on top of that, sort of being queer, I came out as a whistleblower, but I'd been coming out for my entire life. And, for me, it's that sense of otherness and comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That I think gave me a little bit of a nudge to help me become a whistleblower. But with setting up Rappler and being on the outside, I think you're going out there every single day, pissing off a lot of people.
I try not, no.
Do you find that your life's journey sort of influences that?
Oh gosh, I was born in the Philippines and then moved to the United States when martial law was declared in 1972. But when I was with Americans, I never felt completely American. And when I'm with Filipinos, I don't feel completely Filipino either. So I guess it's the otherness part of it, right? And that's a good training for journalism.
Or whistleblowing.
Or whistleblowing.
But I mean, and do you find that there's a bit of an overlap? Because not that I would ever call myself a journalist, but in some senses I feel
Similar.
There's something similar about that, shoving uncomfortable information into people's faces and going, you have to pay attention to this, and then feeling the consequences of that.
So I was going to say that's the mission of journalism, right? You speak truth to power, and you'll know power doesn't like that. In your end, I think you've been speaking truth. I mean, there's a cost to yourself, but you also seem to learn something more from each instance that you've done that. Has this been a good experience or a bad experience?
It's a mixed bag, I guess. I mean, I think it's been, on the whole, a good experience. I've learned a lot.
So have we.
After watching 2016 happen and knowing so many things about what was going on, I learned that I do feel compelled to speak uncomfortable truths. But at the same time, getting called to testify at Congress, as a 20-something gay boy living in London, it's not something that you really expect to be part of your life journey. That was pretty intimidating. It was pretty intimidating to have, the Department of Justice and FBI sitting behind me and, giving me a subpoena after that. It was pretty intimidating to have, but I think on the whole, that wrongdoing with companies like Facebook have at least opened up an awareness into a conversation in our mainstream political discourse that I think is productive.
How easy is it to manipulate mass on a mass scale?
I get frustrated a lot by the current sort of discussion about election manipulation because it so focuses on the United States and to a slightly lesser extent Britain. Because Britain and the United States, and I'm sure coming from the Philippines, you know this full well, have been manipulating elections and democracies around the world for hundreds of years. Britain was a
empire,
a specialist,
and colonizer. Okay.
You know, the reason why, you know, the national drink in Britain is tea, and, you know, the national animal is a lion, and, you know, these are not natural things here. And so I think the reason why people are so upset in the United States or in Britain or other parts of Europe is an American voter now understands what it feels like to be an African voter. Because, you know, living in a country where you've got a gradually eroding information system, where lies are everywhere, where you don't know what to trust. You've got foreign countries left, right, and center trying to manipulate you, trick you, deceive you, and corruption rife in the administration. Looking at the Philippines, it's something that I'd be interested, you know, in hearing your thoughts on. Coming from an ex-US colony where you had a large country dictating the terms of how government works, you know, to becoming independent.
Yeah.
And now having a large American corporation run by a bunch of straight white dudes in America starting to influence, at least, what information is allowed or not allowed to exist, or what gets amplified and promoted or what doesn't in the Philippines. Do you feel like there is a sort of neo-colonialism happening online?
So you're the first person I heard say that colonialism never died, it just moved online, right? And I think we talked about Facebook as the first level, which, I mean, frankly, the collapse, the erosion of our institutions began on Facebook. The description of the Philippines, Stanley Carnell wrote in Our Image, and he described the Philippines as a country that spent 450 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. We were colonized by Spain and then the United States. And I think it's ironic that the country that gave democracy is also the place where Silicon Valley then has given someone like Duterte, Bolsonaro, these types of authoritarian leaders who are killing democracy, the power to do it, to manipulate people. But I think we all know that our countries in the global south bear the brunt of all the tech decisions that have been made, right? I mean, how do we get power? We've never really had a seat at the table in these things. And we bear the worst.
Do you think that you should get a seat at the table?
Sure, that's part of the reason I can speak about it is because I can articulate it in a way that the West can understand.
You currently are, you know, challenging an allegedly and arguably corrupt regime. What does it mean for you to say, give us a seat at the table? Do you give a corrupt regime a seat at the table to talk about how?
No. So I think one of the things this time show us is exactly how human behavior is universal regardless of culture in many ways. Because the very same things that manipulate Americans and Europeans are the very same things that manipulate us in the global south. We just don't have the institutions to fight back. And look how weak your institutions have gotten here. Behavioral modification system. How do we fix it? I've been a journalist for, this is almost 35 years. Right? It's never been as hard to work as a journalist as it is today. I have to post bail 8 times. My government filed 11 cases and did 11 cases and investigations that year, and then began arresting me in 2019. First arrest was Valentine's, right? That was my Valentine's.
Happy Valentine's.
Oh, and my government seems to work very well in February. This February, you know, they've gone and filed a similar case against the largest broadcaster in the Philippines.
What would you say, you know, to your critics in the Philippines about the charges that, you know, the government has lodged against you? Did you break the law?
Oh, my lordy. No, I am challenging power, right? We continue to do our jobs, and we will continue. The line I always use is we are going to hold the line, because the Philippine Constitution, like the United States Constitution, has a Bill of Rights. We're patterned after the United States Constitution. And let me ask you this. What did Cambridge Analytica do in the Philippines?
The company operated in many places around the world. This is something that also I learned spending time there, that, you know, it's really profitable to go and corrupt governments, because governments have, like, really monetizable assets. You've got sovereignty. It's something that's really hard for a company to replicate. And, you know, with that, you can dictate, you know, mineral rights, resource rights, passports, all kinds of things. In the Philippines, you know, they had an office there. You know, the story of the Philippines, you guys kind of got Trump before everybody else.
Okay. Yes. Actually,
you're facing prison and quite serious charges.
at least 80 years.
Why do you care so much?
Because then...
Wouldn't it be easier to just go somewhere else?
I mean, I could toss the same question at you, why you became a whistleblower, right? Because this is the time that matters. Because if I didn't stand up for the standards and ethics, the mission of journalism, when it matters, then everything else I did beforehand doesn't matter. Then I'm not who I am, defining who you are. I hate this time period. I hate that the baton was passed to me now, but that's why it matters. How do we get civic engagement when people don't know the facts?
I don't think we can. It's kind of like what we're doing right now. We're sitting on a stage, we're having a discussion, there's an audience, they know that we're talking. And if I say something that's not true, or somebody can call us out, or a journalist can call us out, what we have now is a situation where I can become invisible and I can go and whisper into everybody's ear, and they all hear something different.
Right.
And I can do that now with the benefit of having followed everybody in the audience around for years and years and years, reading through their text messages, listening to their phones, looking at everything that they look at, even when they don't realize that they're being watched. And I don't think that we can have a functioning democracy when there is no longer public discourse, because everything has become privatized. And oftentimes people don't even know if they're receiving something that is targeted or not.
Which again goes back to, if you get rid of transparency, you get rid of accountability, you get rid of democracy. We can take questions from the audience.
Maria, Julia Pizzetti from the International Centre for Journalists. I've spent time with you and with your news organisation, and I know that you have learned a lot as a result of the orchestrated disinformation campaigns, the deliberate targeting of journalists and Rappler in particular. Given that we're talking particularly about what Christopher has referred to as porting of these problems, you know, from the global south to the west, can you tell us, sitting here in London, what journalists in particular dealing with these problems now can do to prepare themselves?
Oh, Lord. So I think this is an existential moment for democracy globally. Journalism, the death of journalism, I won't say the death of journalists, but the death of journalism is only the first signal for the death of democracy. Our dystopian present is your dystopian future if we don't do anything right now. And of course, with elections coming up in the United States, it's a huge problem. But what are the danger signals? The fact that we don't know the facts, one. The fact that you don't know whom to trust. Because in the Philippines, the first targets of attacks, and these are exponential attacks, right? I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. In the Philippines in 2016, our data showed that women were attacked at least 10 times more than men. So misogyny, sexism, the kind of sexualized gendered attacks on women. What's the end goal? You pound someone to silence so that a whole narrative collapses. And then the voice with the loudest megaphone is amplified bottom up and then top down. Our president, for example, the attacks against me and Rappler, we were attacked for a year on Facebook, on social media. And then after that, a year later, President Duterte said the same exact thing, which is like astroturfing. It lays the groundwork for what the government does. You are all living through something similar. It's just our institutions crumbled within 6 months. Your institutions are a little bit stronger than ours, but human beings behave the same way. And the lack of trust is ushering in a whole new 1930s, 1940s, right? All of a sudden, we're looking at fascism. And I guess this is why I'm so scared, and I want Silicon Valley, I want the West, who have stronger institutions, to do something more about it. Because if we don't, instead of a year or 2 years of this, we're going to look at decades of fascism.
My question to you, Christopher, I am from Kenya. You worked for Cambridge Analytica in Nairobi. Over 70 people died, maybe directly or indirectly related to the role of Cambridge Analytica. My question then is it legal or moral for British or American firms to work in countries like ours and take advantage of lack of regulations and yet continue to operate?
This is something that I found most shocking. When you've got a company in country A, let's say it's in Britain, engaging with multiple firms and contractors, each in their own jurisdiction, creating disinformation or hate propaganda that, were it entirely in Britain, would be wholly illegal. And then disseminating that in another country, because you've got so many different players involved and so many different components of wrongdoing, it's actually really difficult to figure out where technically did a crime occur. In tax law, we're just starting to, create principles and rules that prevent people from just hopping from one jurisdiction to another. But with data and the internet, we are, where tax law was in 1950, not realizing that the internet is global, that data is global, that disinformation can be global. We lack, not only the actual institutions to police, but we actually lack principles until lawmakers start to understand actually how the internet works. And I don't mean that sarcastically, as in that it is actually global and that we need to create principles that embrace that globalness. Lots of wrongdoing can happen.
Maria, you have been threatened and yet continued your fight. I'm originally from Turkey and living in this country for the last 20 years. And in my country, many journalists are in jail now. And many others are afraid of writing, speaking. And so what do you say about journalism and fear?
We've never been as vulnerable as we are today. Because power in countries like yours and mine has taken what the internet, what social media, what companies like Cambridge Analytica, and it it isn't only Cambridge Analytica. We now have Filipino companies like Cambridge Analytica, right? They are the ones taking advantage of it. Why is it that the bad guys are the ones who are taking these tools of manipulation and using them against us? For us, for someone like Chan Dundar, for example, right? He had to flee his country, and he made the decision to do that for fear of his life. Others are dying. We see this in every single report that comes out about journalism. Why are journalists under attack? Because democracy is under attack, because you attack the truth tellers, because the integrity of facts is gone, right? We're not agreeing on the facts, and the internet, the way social media is set up, this one concept of growing it by having you choose friends of friends to grow has polarized our societies. So we have far more polarized societies, and then we have no understanding of what the facts are, and then you attack institutions. And when you have someone like your leader and my leader, they become stronger in this environment. They hijack. And this is why democracy is dying. In our areas of influence, we need to protect the facts, because if you don't have the facts, you can't have integrity of elections. You can't have integrity of markets. How can we have a working society if we don't have a public sphere where we agree on what the facts are? We've always had the devil and the angel on our shoulders, right? But the way the social media platforms have been formulated fans the devil in your ear.
Why is it that you're allowed to experiment on societies, and when real people get killed, there are no actual consequences?
In response to global warming, Germany is gradually shutting down its coal industry. But is it happening fast enough?
We don't have any time to waste anymore. We can't wait. So we're taking direct action to call for the immediate phase out of coal in Germany.
As climate change activists challenge communities reliant on the industry for jobs, People in Power asks, who will win the coal war? On Aljazeera.
A Christian priest.
You are a friend of the Palestinians. Is it true?
I am a friend of everyone.
And champion of the Palestinian cause. An activist who was willing to sacrifice his freedom for his beliefs. Al Jazeera World tells the extraordinary story of the Archbishop and the PLO.
Back to Studio B Unscripted in a moment, but first a check of the headlines. And in Spain, more than 800 people have died from coronavirus. In the past 24 hours, the country's highest number for a single day. Nearly 5,700 people have died in Spain since the outbreak began, and the number of infected has also jumped. It's now upwards of 72,000. Also, the Italian president says the EU needs to pull together to weather this storm.
I
hope everyone fully understands, before it is too late, the seriousness of the threat faced by Europe. Solidarity is not only required by the values of the Union, but is also in the common interest.
Reporter Marta Herrera has more from Madrid.
Madrid, being the epicenter or the ground zero of the whole pandemic, cannot cope anymore with the corpse of all the dead bodies, all the people that have died, and the municipal funeral company had to open an ice rink to take there all the people that have died, but they cannot cope there anymore, and they have arranged to set up everything in Madrid's courts. So this situation is quite critical right now.
New figures from Iran show the death toll rising past 2,500. There's also been more than 3,000 new infections, bringing the total number of cases to around 35,000. Iran's president's been reassuring people, though, the crisis will end soon and the health system is ready to handle the strain. US President signed a $2.2 trillion aid package to help people cope with effects of the pandemic. America has the highest number of cases worldwide, more than 100,000 people infected. But China's begun easing restrictions on the 11 million people in Wuhan, where the outbreak was first reported. People are now allowed to enter the city that's been under lockdown for more than 2 months. China's health ministry says 54 imported cases have been recorded in other parts of the mainland. And police in South Africa have been struggling to enforce a 21-day nationwide lockdown, which came into force on Friday midnight. People are only allowed out of their homes to buy groceries or for health emergencies. Alcohol sales have also been banned, but large crowds have been gathering in the poorer townships, where social distancing is almost impossible because of the existing cramped living conditions. Up to date with all the coronavirus pandemic news. The News Hour coming up for you from here in Doha in about 25 minutes' time.
I'm sure a lot of people in the audience, have heard bits and pieces about what's going on in the Philippines. But from your perspective, what's the big deal? Why should we care about not only what you and your organization are experiencing, but what's more broadly happening in the Philippines?
I think that our organization, Rappler, has been fighting impunity on 2 fronts that are relevant to everyone around the world. The first is these information operations, the manipulation on Facebook, on social media, because when you say a lie 1 million times, it becomes the fact. And then if you don't have facts, you then can create whatever narrative you want, including journalists are criminals, right? The second is connected to that, which is the impunity in the drug war. President Duterte, our president, was elected with the power of social media in 2016, May of 2016. Actually, this was the beginning of the dominoes tumbling down. May of 2016.
Before the alt-right got cool.
Right. But they're all connected now, I think, right? In our drug war, if you look at the numbers, the UN, our own Commission on Human Rights, says in a little less than 3 years, at least 27,000 people have died. These are huge numbers. In 21 years of Ferdinand Marcos, you're talking about a death toll of a little over 3,200. So impunity in the drug war, impunity in information operations. Our institutions collapsed within 6 months because we didn't have facts. And journalists like me are under attack. And it's not just Little Rappler, which is a startup, although I guess I could go to jail for 80 some odd years because of the cases that have been filed. They are politically motivated. I am not doing anything different than I used to do when I was working 20 years ago.
What is different?
Tech. And I think one of the reasons you were fascinating to me is because you came into this, you looked at the code, you looked at the data, and you later realized its impact on society. I'm waiting for Silicon Valley to realize that as well.
Do you think Silicon Valley, which is predominantly run by white privileged men, large number of whom are American, do you think that plays a role?
Huge.
If more people from the Philippines or other countries were in leadership roles in tech, do you think that would make a difference?
I'd like to say if journalists were the ones making some of the tech decisions, it would be a little bit easier. It would be better. So when Mark Zuckerberg essentially said that it is okay for politicians to lie, that spells doom in this tech-enabled world, right? That spells the end of democracy, because you cannot tell fact from fiction. Before you can create a marketplace, you have to have rules of a marketplace, and the rules that we have in social media don't work. You also talked about values. What are the values? What are the values of tech?
Optimization, monetization.
Thank you. Right.
I think actually one of the things that lots of journalists even celebrated back when tech was cool was, the mantra of Facebook, move fast and break things. And, the hubris of that, not really thinking that, what you could be doing is breaking democracy, and not just in your own country, but around the world.
And even with the evidence there, right? So
well, it's interesting that you bring up the death toll of the current regime in the Philippines. I think to Myanmar,
yes.
where Facebook was actually warned by journalists, the United Nations, about what was happening, where Facebook's systems were being deliberately exploited to propagate hate messaging, which contributed, and this is not me saying it, this is the United Nations saying, contributing to ethnic violence and ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
We would have thought that would be quite a big deal for any CEO to sort of be told that. When you look at Facebook's response about that, where, well, the world's complicated, we'll try harder, meanwhile thousands of people get murdered, do you think that there are parallels between what happened in Myanmar and what either is happening or could even progress to happen in the Philippines?
It's in every country, right? The ethnic violence is still continuing in Myanmar. The information operations that's led by the military is still continuing in Myanmar on Facebook. The guy who led that UN fact-finding was Marzuki Darusman. He's an Indonesian who used to head the Commission on Human Rights. That report is damning. Facebook has its own independent report, and they say the same things. I'm shocked. Nothing yet is moving. And that's part of the reason. So here we go. Like, what do we do? I mean, I'm not completely against Facebook, although right now I am. I mean, we're fact-checking partners.
You're against bad behavior.
I'm against impunity.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at it, every time Facebook tries to do the right thing, the market's incentives actually punishes them.
I provided a lot of information to American regulators. Facebook received the largest fine that a technology company had received in history.
Yeah.
$5 billion from the FTC and $100 million from the SEC. And the share value went up. We're in a weird situation now where you can be at the helm of a company that has received the largest financial penalty of a company in your industry in all of history, and shareholders go, great, let's buy more stock. Because the worst that can happen is that much money. When you do something really bad, sure, it's going to take a ding off of this year's profit margin, but hey-ho, that's it. What do you think can be done or should be done? Do you think that regulatory action can even work if one country has this regulation, another country doesn't?
I think some of the states in the US are now talking about data portability. Mm-hmm. I think that's a potential solution. So if you own your own data, you can take your data out of Facebook and put it into another social media platform.
Do you think that people would actually move, or do you think it would start to create potentially a two-tiered system where truth and privacy become luxury goods in a marketplace?
Interesting. That could be, but I'll tell you the behavior of Filipinos, given the poison that's been injected into Facebook, right? If you think of lies as poison,